Brandon is a pretty good dog. He will actually wait for that treat until there's a string of drool that connects it to the ground. That's my son's favorite game. Sadly, though, if you were not there to watch him, the game was the other day I came home and a friend of mine had given me a 9x13 pan of brownies. We had about a third of those, and he drug it off the counter and had the other 2/3. On a lonely stretch of highway in the desert of Arizona, Nathaniel Edison preached. Every day, Nathaniel would go walk up and down the highway, preaching that God was on his way and it was the end of the world. One day, Nathaniel, in his walking and preaching, came across a large lever, about 6 feet tall, right next to the highway, with a sign that said, "Pull to end the world." Well, Nathaniel decided this would be a great place to set up shop, so he began to preach every day at the lever, and people began to gather around. Instead of just zipping by the highway, they would stop and listen to Nathaniel's eloquent preaching. Until one day, so many had gathered that they choked the highway so full of cars that it stopped traffic. Then came along a large semi. He was going too fast and couldn't stop, and so the semi-driver had to choose between running over Nathaniel or running over the lever. And when the state trooper got there to ask why the truck driver had chosen to do in for Nathaniel, all the truck driver could say was, "Better Nate than lever." better Nate than lever. I have more bad jokes after that. If you want to come around to the service, I've got a pocket full. We are talking today about the end of the world, the apocalypse. This story is remembered by Mark and the other gospel writers because the early church was sort of obsessed with the end of the world. They had one stream of thought that Jesus would be returning in their lifetime. And much of their preparation was for Jesus to show up in their lifetime. That was sort of the imminent apocalypse stream of thought. And we still see that today. You'll see that pop up every now and then. Every time we hit the millennium year, when 2000 occurred, you heard those that began preaching it was imminent, that the end of the world was about to be upon us. In 2012, we saw movies that came up about the end of the world. Every once in a while, you'll see it pop up, people trying to read the tea leaves, that this is the end of the world. The other stream of thought came about because, well, Jesus didn't return when they thought he would. Those first witnesses, the first-person witnesses who had actually seen Jesus with their own eyes, began to die off. That generation began to leave. And so people began to question when Jesus was going to return, and thus developed a more delayed apocalypse stream of thought. Thankfully, also, that's when they started to record all this stuff so that we would remember what was actually seen at the time. And part of what was seen was this story of Jesus teaching about the end of time, the return of Jesus himself. It's a fascinating teaching. It's almost as if Jesus is trying to help us see something in between the two. In between the sort of frantic, stressed out anticipation of Jesus' instant return, and then sort of the lackadaisical, I don't even think about it every day because it's so delayed, Jesus' return stream of thought. That there is a third way, there's a different way to think about this. We remember this as Advent because it's helpful for us as we go through our Advent season to prepare for Christmas. Because it's a helpful way to be watchful. Jesus sort of helps us see this, I think, through the way he tells that parable itself. It's interesting that when Jesus talks about the parable, he talks about how these servants are left. He talks specifically about the master might return in the evening, at midnight, at dawn, or in the morning. If we lay that structure on top of what happened at the end of Jesus' life, we see in the evening Jesus serving the Last Supper. At midnight, Jesus being betrayed while he is at prayer when he's arrested. At dawn, when Peter denies him. And then in the morning, when he's delivered to Pilate. Spin this backwards. If you were to start reading this text at verse 24, Jesus says that he will return when the sun no longer shines. There's that whole quote at the top, which is what we remember when Jesus is hanging on the cross and being done. In essence, Jesus is sort of showing us that this idea of Jesus' return is best thought of acknowledging that Jesus already came. That in some way, Jesus' first advent, the primary advent, the first incarnation of Jesus among us, gives us a pattern for our watchfulness. If we pattern our watchfulness for Jesus' return upon what happened when Jesus was here the first time, we have a much better experience. Because it's not just about watching with these eyes, and it's not just about looking busy when Jesus finally shows up, but it's about preparing ourselves and those around us for when Jesus does return. Many have read this and thought, Jesus is pushing us to look for the vulnerable and open spaces around us for an opportunity to be watchful. You've seen this image on social media or other media outlets. Mm-hmm. You've seen the other pictures of Ferguson, the riots, and the protests. This is important. The young man is Devontae Hart. Devontae Hart was adopted by a white couple. And when the Ferguson riots began, his mothers said that he was very distraught, very anxious. So they had decided on this day that as a family, they would go to downtown Portland and try to do something concrete that would be a solution for Devontae's felt anxiety. So they put on signs that said free hugs. You remember the free hug campaign that was popular a while back? Some great videos that came out of people offering free hugs. So the mothers took Devontae and his siblings and went downtown Portland with these signs with the idea that they would do this random act of kindness, and that would be for Devontae an experience of a concrete solution to his felt anxiety. Well, while they're downtown, they come across one of the nationwide protests related to Ferguson. And Devontae and his family stand off to the side and begin listening to the various speeches and the speakers and the rallying. The officer is Sergeant Brett Barnum. He's a 21-year vet in the police force there in Portland. He's a traffic cop, so he was there with his motorcycle. And his job really was to direct traffic, to try and keep everyone safe and keep things from getting too chaotic. He's got a couple of teenage sons of his own, and so as he was at his post, he saw Devontae tearing up and trembling and getting anxious, so he just called Devontae over and had the simple kind of conversation you would have with any kid. He asked him about his favorite food, what he liked to do at school, what he was hoping for Christmas, and Devontae began to calm down as he became a little distracted from what had made him anxious and began to think about other things in his life. Finally, Sergeant Barnum saw the sign that said free hugs and simply asked Devontae if he could have one. And Devontae gave him one. And Devontae found a concrete solution to his felt anxiety. This is a different way to stand watch. This is a different way to stand watch during Advent. An opportunity for us to be watchful not just for Jesus in whatever form you think Jesus is going to show up in when Jesus comes back at the end of the world, but to be watchful for Jesus providing those open spaces, those vulnerable spaces, whether it's the vulnerable Jesus in the manger as the baby newly born that we're all preparing for at Christmas, or Jesus, the vulnerable adult male hanging on a cross that we prepare for at Easter. Those vulnerable moments in our lives, our neighbors' lives, the stranger's life. Those times where we can step into that vulnerable openness and make a difference. Like Sergeant Barnum waving over this 12-year-old and asking for a hug. Concrete solutions for felt anxiety. Whether it's the anxiety that Jesus is going to show up and we didn't look busy enough, or felt anxiety that the world around us is chaotic and dangerous, and sometimes it's completely unfair, and we suffer from that. In the midst of all that, we are given the opportunity to be prepared, to be preparing ourselves. Those that engage in this kind of Advent preparation find not only the opportunity to provide concrete solutions for people's felt anxiety, or real anxiety, or real need, but find themselves different in the moment. Find that stepping into that vulnerable space helps deal with their own brokenness and often shapes their soul in ways that are life-giving. Thus, finding ourselves arriving at Christmas Eve, not just unwrapping gifts under our tree, but unwrapping amazing gifts in our spirit that not only don't rust, but fill all of our relationships with a different kind of glow. Thanks be to God for moments like this that point us to the moments in our day. David's going to pray with us and for us today. He's going to help us to come to God in prayer, and then we'll close